The 66th plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. Before proceeding further, I would like to remind members of the following mitigation measures that are in place for this meeting. All delegates are required to wear a face covering at all times whilst in public spaces and in the General Assembly Hall, except one directly addressing the meeting. All staff are also required to wear face coverings at all times. Disposable face masks are available if needed. All delegations are to refrain from direct contact, including handshakes and other physical contact during greetings in recognition of the physical distancing requirements. All delegations should remain conscious of COVID-19, hand sanitizing, and contact precautions. All movement and, if necessary, queuing requires 2-meter physical distancing, and delegates are requested to minimize activity until seated in the meeting room. All statements will be made by delegations from their national seats. With the assistance of the Occupational Safety and Health representatives, I will oversee the implementation of the mitigating measures in the course of the proceedings. If at any moment it appears that the guidelines are not being strictly observed, I'll have no choice but to draw the attention of delegates to these guidelines. Because of the health impact of the coronavirus pandemic, any large group meeting in an enclosed space such as this represents a risk to both delegates and the Secretariat staff supporting the meeting. Your efforts to comply with the new requirements for a safe meeting are part of a social contract that is critical, not only to the safe conduct of this meeting, but to the meetings which may follow. I thank you for your cooperation in this regard. As announced in the Journal Assembly Hall has the seating protocol for the 75th session of the General Assembly. And the first plenary meeting of that session will be held immediately after this meeting. I now give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, for his statement.
Excellencies, I'm pleased to join you for the closing of the 74th session of the General Assembly, a session like no other in the past 75 years. The last 7 months have been extremely difficult for the people we serve and for many of us, personally and professionally. The COVID-19 pandemic has cut a swath through our lives and our communities. We are all dealing with high levels of uncertainty. Right now, we are still in the middle of the fog. The extent of the pandemic, its social and economic impact, and its interaction with other global challenges and megatrends is unknowable. Our only hope is to respond with unity and solidarity while supporting the most vulnerable. It has been a privilege to work with the General Assembly, our common platform for international consensus and action during these difficult days, under the leadership of His Excellency Professor Tijani Muhammad Bande. Professor Muhammad Bande's capable stewardship saw the General Assembly adopt new working methods to continue its work smoothly. He made great efforts to ensure business continuity through regular convening of the General Committee and other online briefings. On a personal note, I would like to thank Professor Muhammad Bande for his wise, determined, and serene approach to those unforeseen challenges and his excellent judgment under pressure. I commend the patience and support he has demonstrated during these unprecedented times. The introduction in March of new decision-making procedures made it possible for the General Assembly to adopt resolutions and decisions without in-person meetings. More than 70 resolutions and decisions were adopted in this way. 2 of these, adopted with wide co-sponsorship, called for solidarity and global access to medicines, vaccines, and medical equipment during the pandemic. The 74th session of the General Assembly also oversaw elections to the Security Council and the Economic and Social Council, and successful intergovernmental negotiations on the declaration of the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, and on the omnibus resolution on comprehensive and coordinated response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I thank you all for your support and cooperation and congratulate you on completing a full program of work. Excellencies, the United Nations has mobilized fully to support member states in response to the pandemic. We have put our supply chains, assets, expertise and capacities around the world to work and supported the health response by distributing medical supplies, training health workers, and increasing testing and tracing capabilities. Our humanitarian agencies are targeting some 250 million people at greatest risk. Our peacekeeping missions are taking steps to protect vulnerable communities, and our country teams are providing direct support and expertise to governments for a sustainable, inclusive response and recovery. We are using our communications channel to share information on prevention and containment, and we have launched the Verified campaign to promote facts and science and fight the spread of dangerous misinformation online. Here in New York, we have made every effort to ensure that our day-to-day work continues with minimum disruption by adopting innovative working methods based on new technologies. And we have also taken extensive steps to keep delegates and staff safe, including by providing testing. I thank you all for your support to this important work and look forward to continue our cooperation in the 75th session of the General Assembly. Virtual participation may mean that a record number of heads of state and government take part in the high-level week, but going online will undoubtedly create new challenges. We will need to learn as we go and continue to demonstrate the greatest flexibility. I look forward to working with you all under the presence of His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkır to make the 75th section a success. The world looks to the United Nations as the indispensable forum for international cooperation on global challenges. Let us continue our work together to beat the pandemic and build a better future. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his statement. Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency Volkan Bozkır, President-elect of the General Assembly at the 75th session, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. I welcome you all to the closing of the 74th session of the General Assembly. I thank you for your support throughout the session and extend my gratitude to the Vice President of the General Assembly, the chairs of the 6 main committees, as well as the co-chairs, co-coordinators, and co-facilitators of the processes of the General Assembly. I'm grateful to the governments that have supported the Office of the President of the General Assembly through contribution to the Trust Fund and/or the secondment of staff. These proved critical to the success of the office. I'm particularly grateful to the President of Nigeria for nominating me and the African states for allowing me to represent them for this important work, and for all of you for supporting me through the election till now. It was a pleasure to work in close coordination with the President of the Security Council and ECOSOC, as well as the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General, who showed unprecedented support for the work of the Assembly. I extend my deepest appreciation to the Department of General Assembly and Conference Management, the Department for Global Communication, and the Department for Safety and Security for the dedication and selfless service of their personnel to the General Assembly. The General Assembly could not have functioned well without the dedication of the entire Secretariat staff, including those of the interpreters, protocol officers, and so on. In addition, I thank the staff of the OPGA, led by my chef de cabinet, Ambassador Marisika, for enduring efforts throughout the extraordinary session. Excellencies, we started this session guided by the hopes and aspirations of the people we serve. This was reflected in the high-level events we had in the first days of the session. The statement of our heads of state and delegations, head of delegations during the high-level week, and broad support for my priorities for the session. From the beginning, I entreated member states to give due attention to the critical issues at hand. In particular, I urged them to tackle the root causes of conflict by galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication and zero hunger, quality education, climate action, and inclusion. As illustrated in the handover report, the General Assembly has made great strides in these and other areas. The first high-level meeting of the 74th session of the Assembly focused on global health, when we did not know that the session and the year 2020 would be defined by a pandemic. The emergence of the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, has shown that we have to continue to deepen multilateral cooperation in the health sector, as in other areas, and implement the commitment of our heads of state and government to scaling up national and global efforts to build a healthier world for all. It is important that in achieving this, we must continue to deepen cooperation to ensure that despite the challenge posed by COVID-19, we'll meet the goals and targets we set for ourselves against 2030. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I congratulate you for the leadership you have demonstrated in the past 12 months as we tackled issues across the 3 pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, human rights, and development. These included financing for development, tackling the peculiar challenges faced by small island developing states, prioritizing the rights of the child, elimination of nuclear weapons, and ensuring that peacekeeping operations got needed funding. It's also gratifying that despite our differences, the first to 6 committees were able to achieve broad measure of consensus on a diverse range of issues at the core of our organization. However, it is imperative that I emphasize the need to continue to commit to agreed frameworks and to work harder to ensure that we can deliver for the people we serve through consensus. It is, for that reason, regrettable that the first committee adopted 64% of its resolutions by recorded vote. Excellencies, we cannot underestimate the importance of this assembly, which is founded upon equality of voice and vote. Its resolutions reflect the aspirations of humanity, helping the normative development of international law with far-reaching ramifications across a wide breadth of issues for individuals and for states. I'm thus grateful that member states had the foresight to adopt and flexibility to adopt decisions 74/544 and 74/555 at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. This allowed the membership to adopt more than 70 resolutions and elect chairs of the main committees for the 75th session of the Assembly. This is fully in accord with the expectation of the people we serve. The General Assembly takes progressive action to create a better world for all, as evidenced by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the principle of self-determination, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and a host of issues. This year, Excellencies, the membership rallied to adopt GA resolution that called for solidarity and global access to medicines and medical equipment. The resolution, comprehensive and coordinated response to COVID-19 pandemic in particular, is an omnibus one, wide-ranging in its reach, resulting from intensive negotiations which highlighted the importance of multilateralism and solidarity as we continued to contend with this pandemic. We must continue to send a clear message that the General Assembly will always stand, as with the United Nations system more broadly, with those who have suffered from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and those whose loved ones have succumbed to the virus. Excellencies, this is a moment of reckoning for our shared planet and future. This is a time for action, ambition, equality, inclusion, and partnership. It is therefore important that in the work of the United Nations, we continue to engage and involve youth. They have shown uncommon leadership in the face of the difficulties of our world. They have been particularly vocal regarding climate and social justice issues, and we must listen to them as our lives depend on this. It's also important to continue to make the case for other underrepresented groups, including women and people with disability. It is in doing so that we'll be certain of peace, justice, and development. Excellencies, in this 75th year of the establishment of our organization, we must renew our commitment to its ideals and values. We must fashion more creative ways of better delivery for those we serve. Many vulnerable individuals and groups look upon us. We must not waver in our commitment to serve them. 75 years ago, skeptics doubted the resolve of the members of the new organization. Our founders did not allow cynicism to prevail then, and we will not allow it to prevail now. To ensure this, we must continue to thoughtfully define our actions and uphold our pledge to leave no one behind, even in the face of disagreement. Indeed, in spite of disagreement, we must practice empathy and choose unity over discord. I wish in closing to wish His Excellency, I will in closing wish His Excellency, President-elect of the Assembly at the 75th session, Mr. Volkan Bozkır, a successful and productive 75th session, and assure him of my solid support throughout his tenure. I'm convinced it is the same for all of us. I'm grateful for the trust you have placed in me as President of the 74th session of the Assembly, and it's my honor to have served as President of this Premier Assembly in the year that passed. I thank you all. Thank you. We are now coming to the end of the 74th regular session of the General Assembly. May I invite representatives to stand and observe 1 minute of silent prayer or meditation, including in tribute to the memory of His Excellency Habia Dekoya, 5th Secretary General of the United Nations, who passed away on 4th March 2020, and His Excellency Pierre Nkurunziza, President of the Republic of Burundi, who passed away on 9 June 2020. It's now my pleasure, Excellencies, to invite His Excellency Volkan Bozkır, President-elect of the 25th session of the General Assembly, to make a statement, and in accordance with General Assembly Resolution 70/305 of 13 September 2016, to take an oath of office. Mr. President-elect.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Mr. Secretary General, President Mohamed Bande, ladies and gentlemen. It is a privilege to address you today as we close the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly. In the past 6 months, our plans for the 75th year of the United Nations have changed. Today, we have other urgent priorities. Our masks remind us of the very serious threat we face. They remind us of the lives we have lost and the challenges we need to overcome. They remind us we are in this together. Excellencies, since the start of the crisis, the critics of multilateralism have been more vocal. The pandemic has been used to justify unilateral steps and weaken the rules-based international system. International organizations have been reproached, and the need for international cooperation has been questioned. These criticisms are not baseless, but their conclusions are misguided. Make no mistake, no state can combat this pandemic alone. Social distancing will not help at the international level. Unilateralism will only strengthen the pandemic. It will move us further away from our shared goal. At this time of crisis, it is our responsibility to strengthen people's faith in multilateral cooperation and international institutions with the UN at the center. We need to continue a frank, transparent, and result-oriented dialogue about what went wrong in our efforts to contain the virus, and what we have to do to avoid a similar situation in the future. We will also need to ask and answer questions about how COVID-19 vaccines can be distributed fairly and equitably. This is not just a question of health and economics, but of ethics in most profound way. Excellencies, considering these recent developments, I have been carefully reflecting on my priorities. Confronting the effects of the coronavirus in all their dimensions will be an overarching priority for my presidency. At the same time, we must not forget our existing challenges. Firstly, the 75th year of the United Nations should be a time to revitalize the spirit of cooperation that laid the foundation of this organization. In recent years, the trust deficit between nations has impeded the work of the United Nations. Member states fail to compromise, and when there is compromise, it is based on the lowest common denominator. At times, this has been the case for the General Assembly, and it has been the case for the Security Council. As President of the General Assembly, the most representative and most democratic organ of the United Nations, I will endeavor to build trust between member states. I will do my best to build consensus around the important and timely issues on our agenda, from arms control to human rights, to climate and sustainable development. Second, during the 75th session, the General Assembly should reflect on its own work and embrace reforms in order to be effective and relevant. We need to enhance coherence by addressing gaps, overlaps, and duplication where they exist. The pandemic-related restrictions could be an opportunity to streamline our agenda without compromising on substance. I'm aware that this is a delicate task, but I will put my best efforts towards an outcome that realizes success from this dreadful pandemic, that sees this House come out stronger and more united with results to show for efforts. Third, in order to improve the delivery of our mandate, we need to hear from the people we serve. I see this hall as the Parliament of Humanity, and I intend to use this platform to amplify the voices of the most vulnerable people in the world. Here in the chief deliberative, policy-making and representative organ, we must consider the concerns of all people in need or under oppression. I will work with member states to ensure they have a voice, and I also intend to use these good offices to highlight the importance of impartial and unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid and full respect for international humanitarian law in conflicts and crises. Fourth, as we enter the decade of action to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, it is clear that we are not on track. Throughout the term, I will promote the use of emerging technologies, strengthened data, and results-oriented action to ensure that no one is left behind. Finally, in this seminal year for women's empowerment, I will also champion gender equality across the agenda of the 75th session, which evidence shows supports greater levels of peace and prosperity. Mr. Secretary General, with these thoughts in mind, I look forward to reinforcing our partnership, which I believe is essential to the effective stewardship of this organization. I will ensure my efforts complement yours, including through supporting implementation of the UN reform agenda to make the UN more responsive and effective. I will also work with the presidents of the Security Council and ECOSOC to coordinate our activities for maximum effect. Efficiency, effectiveness, accountability, and non-discrimination will be the guiding principles of my presidency. I will represent the membership as a whole. I will listen to the views of all member states equally. I believe that we need to lead by example and inspire the world, and I will work towards this end. The General Assembly cannot stand idle while human beings suffer. This is against the principle of collective responsibility that underpins the UN Charter. Excellencies, as the 74th session draws to a close, I here want to thank His Excellency Mr. Tijani Mohamed Bande for his considered and steady leadership as President of the 74th session of the General Assembly. Excellency, you once described yourself as a perpetual student. Your efforts to navigate the General Assembly in these difficult times proved that you are also a fast learner. Since the start of the pandemic, the Office of the President of the General Assembly, under your direction, has guided the work of the General Assembly transparently and effectively. You have shown a strong leadership. I look forward to continuing to champion the priorities of your term, including poverty eradication and inclusive and equitable education for all. These sustainable development goals are crucial to the future prosperity and peace of our planet. On behalf of all member states, I would like to thank you and your team once again and look forward to continuing to work with you as the Nigerian permanent representative. Can I please ask a big round of applause to President Mohamed Bande. Thank you. And I shall now take the oath of this hallowed office. I solemnly declare, I solemnly declare that I shall truthfully perform my duties and exercise the functions entrusted to me as President of the General Assembly of the United Nations in all loyalty, discretion, and conscience, and that I shall discharge these functions and regulate my conduct with the interest of the United Nations only in view, and in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and the Code of Ethics for the President of the General Assembly, without seeking or accepting any instruction in regard to the performance of my duties from any government or other source external to the organization.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkır, President-elect of the 75th session, for his statement and for the taking of oath. I would now like to invite the President-elect of the 75th session to meet me at the side of the rostrum for the handing over of the gavel. The 75th session will open immediately after the adjournment. I declare closed the 74th session of the General Assembly. The meeting is adjourned.
It is my great pleasure and honor to declare open the 75th regular session of the General Assembly and call to order its first plenary meeting. In accordance with Rule 62 of the Rules of Procedure, I invite representatives to stand and observe 1 minute of silence, prayer, or meditation. Distinguished delegates, I am deeply honored to address you all for the first time as President of the United Nations General Assembly. As a national of a founding member state, it is a privilege to hold this office for the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And I want to thank you for entrusting me with this duty. Ladies and gentlemen, next week, more heads of state will address the general debate than ever before. The crucial high-level meetings over the 2 weeks will guide our work for the session. I'm confident that their impact will not be compromised by the circumstances. The context in which we are working serves to remind us on the necessity of the multilateral system and inspires us all to make use of the UN Charter to address our collective challenges. I will do my utmost to support and lead, with your fruitful participation, the high-level meetings to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, the 25th anniversary of the Fourth World Conference on Women, a high-level plenary meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons, and the Biodiversity Summit, in addition to the general debate. During the 75th session, we will hold 2 General Assembly special sessions, one on COVID-19, the first special session convened to discuss a pandemic, and the second against corruption. I will also work with you successfully implement the various mandates entrusted to me, including but not limited to review of the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy, commemoration of the 25th anniversary of the World Summit for Social Development, preparations for the 5th United Nations Conference on Least Developed Countries, high-level meeting regarding water-related goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda, Oceans Conference to support the implementation of Sustainable Development Goal 14, as well as the revitalization of the work of the General Assembly and Security Council reform. As long as health conditions allow, I intend to continue physical meetings of the General Assembly, taking the necessary mitigation measures to protect the health and safety of delegates and UN staff. In our business of diplomacy, there is no substitute to meeting counterparts face-to-face to build long-term understanding of each other's positions and forge compromise. Thank you. And now let's go to work. I now invite the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, to make a statement. Your Excellency.
Excellencies, it is a pleasure to be with you again for the Nations General Assembly. Let me begin by warmly congratulating His Excellency Ambassador Volkan Bozkır of Turkey on his election as General Assembly President. Mr. President, you can fully count on our support and our committed partnership in this common work. This year will be a critical one in the life of our organization. We must continue to respond to the immediate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic by strengthening our systems and supporting the development of equitable distribution of treatments and vaccines. We must also prepare to build a strong recovery based on the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. All the while, the Assembly will continue with its work across the full range of global challenges: peace and security, disarmament, human rights, gender equality, and sustainable development. Ambassador Bozkir, I wish you well in your efforts. As we mark the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, it is clear that the world has high expectations of us as the main platform for multilateralism and cooperation on a rules-based international system. Your emphasis on streamlining the agenda of the General Assembly and balancing the three pillars of our work to achieve concrete results must help to meet those expectations. The nature of multilateralism is changing, and I have frequently pointed to the need for a more networked and inclusive multilateralism for the 21st century. I therefore welcome your pledge to work towards consolidating trust and cohesion among United Nations member states, major groups of countries, and other international organizations. These efforts are essential to the unity and solidarity we need in this crucial year as we respond to the pandemic, build a strong recovery, and implement the Sustainable Development Goals. I also thank you for your support for the United Nations Reform Agenda and your commitment to work closely with my office and with the Secretariat as a whole. I look forward to working closely with you during the 75th session of the General Assembly to address our shared objectives. The entire Secretariat is ready to offer you all our cooperation and support, and I wish you a very successful mandate. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his statement. Next, I would like, in keeping with established practice, to invite the attention of the General Assembly to document A-75-344. It contains a letter from the Secretary General addressed to the President of the General Assembly, in which he informs the Assembly that 4 member states are in arrears in the payment of their financial contributions to the United Nations within the terms of Article 19 of the Charter. I would like to remind delegations that under Article 19 of the Charter, a member of the United Nations which is in arrears in the payment of its financial contributions to the organization shall have no vote in the General Assembly if the amount of its arrears equals and exceeds the amount of the contributions due from it for the preceding 2 full years. The General Assembly may, nevertheless, permit such a member to vote if it is satisfied that the failure to pay is due to conditions beyond control of the member. May I therefore take it that the General Assembly takes note of the information contained in document A-75-344. It is so decided. I would now invite the General Assembly to turn to the appointment of the members of the Credentials Committee. Rule 28 of the Rules of Procedure provides that the General Assembly at the beginning of each session shall appoint, on the proposal of the President, a Credentials Committee consisting of 9 members. Accordingly, it is proposed that for the 75th session, the Credentials Committee should consist of the following member states: Cameroon, China, Iceland, Papua New Guinea, Russian Federation, Trinidad and Tobago, United Republic of Tanzania, United States of America, and Uruguay. May I take it that these states that I have just mentioned are hereby appointed members of the Credentials Committee? It is so decided. Delegations are reminded that credentials should be submitted to the Office of Legal Affairs. Additional details are available in the information note A-INF-75-4. Before concluding, I would like to inform delegations that the General Committee will meet tomorrow morning, Wednesday, 16th of September 2020, at 10 a.m. in the General Assembly Hall to consider the memorandum of the Secretary General on the organization of the 75th session of the General Assembly, adoption of the agenda, and allocation of items issued as A-BUR-75-1. The first meeting of the General Assembly at the 75th session is now concluded. Before adjourning the meeting, I would also like to inform members that part of the occupational safety and health plan for this meeting includes the possibility of follow-up in the unfortunate and hopefully unlikely event of a case of COVID-19. If any delegate develops features of COVID-19 or has a positive COVID-19 test in the next 14 days, the United Nations Medical Director strongly encourages you to contact the medical service using the Medical in Confidence email address osh@un.org. The United Nations Clinic will undertake normal contact tracing process, which is entirely confidential, and no contact will be told who the case was. Testing can be also arranged through UN Clinic if required. Following the arrangements in recent formal plenary meetings, the Secretariat will actively manage the exit by calling each row for departure in a staggered manner, and members are therefore requested to remain seated after the adjournment of the meeting. The meeting is adjourned.
Excellencies, please remain seated as announced by the President of the General Assembly until your roll is called. I'd like to kindly request the delegations seated in the first row from Iceland to Italy to leave one by one. From Iceland to Italy.